This is Hot Mic. Hot Mic. On the networks of WDAY. Here's Dom Izzo.
Welcome back, everybody. Hour 2 of Hot Mic, ready to rock and roll on this Thursday morning. Avery Coonan, NDSU women's basketball standout, will join us about a half hour on her decision to return to the Bison for her junior season that's coming up later on in the second hour. But anytime there's any football news happening of importance like this, we got to dive into it. And it happened yesterday. Not necessarily the news is stunning because we've been talking about it for a while. But now it seems more official when Pete Thamel has his name attached to it. The story yesterday on Sacramento State that they will apply for FBS membership going the independent route. They don't have a league. They don't have an invite. But be damned, they're going to be FBS. Their president has been talking about it for the better part of 6 months. To chat about that, I asked Zach McKinnel to join us, who runs FCS Football Central and the Blue Bloods. If you need some FCS info, next to our guy Sam Herder, Zach is the dude to talk about that. And I appreciate you giving us a few minutes this morning. It's not surprising to those of us that follow the division, but there's going to be the question I have, how in the world are they going to pay for this? I don't know how that's going to happen.
I'm with you. And I never want to say a decision's a bad idea until we see it play out right, because hindsight and, being skeptical can be dangerous. But you're right. I mean, because even I think Sam was the one that broke it yesterday. You have to pay $1 million exit fee now for the Big Sky, have a $5 million transition fee up to the FBS. And then I look at teams that have been successful being independent, and Notre Dame's really the only one that's been able to do it long term. And I think me and you both know Sac State doesn't have Notre Dame money, nor do they have Liberty money, who was also able to make the jump. And they were able to sustain a little bit, right? But even it got too expensive for them as they are now in the CUSA. So I look at Sac State, and I think it's betting on yourself, right? And maybe it works out, right? Maybe in a year, right? Me and you were sitting here in going into 2026, and hey, they might be in the Pac-2 or whatever, the Mountain West, whatever it may be out west. Or we could be sitting here like, okay, there's not another invite.
Yeah.
Do you have funds for another year of independent football? I really do think it was a risk. And it's just like walking into a casino, man, and putting all the money on red and hoping that it hits. Because if it doesn't, you could see a move like Idaho where they have to come back. Or where does the university sit in terms of funds if they have to fund this out 3, 4, 5 years?
So just off the Liberty thing, here's what Liberty did independent. This was their record: 6-6, 8-5, 10-1. That was the COVID year, which everything was weird. So you maybe put that with an asterisk. 8-5, 8-5. So I mean, it was okay, but I mean, obviously they went whatever they were, 13-1 or whatever. They were really good, obviously, this past season. But they had the funds for it, Zach. That's the difference. Sacramento State's coming in off, I think, 3-8 or 3-9 this past season, and they can't fill it now as a Big Sky school. And I know they have all these plans for NIL and getting some major boosters. They've hired coaches who are have big names. Again, I got to see it before I'm ready to hop in with 2 feet on this.
Well, the other thing too, right? Because the shine of FBS right now is what they're recruiting off of. They got NIL, and it's, hey, come play FBS football. And that's what they're selling kids on. But kids want to play for rings, for trophies, for meaningful games, for championships. They're not going to be postseason eligible if all this goes through this year. They're not going to be postseason eligible next year. Even when they're postseason eligible in 2027, let's say they haven't joined a conference, you don't have a conference championship to fight for. You don't have any bowl tie-ins.
Yeah, right.
So there's no guarantee you're going to get a bowl invite, and you don't get any college football playoff revenue. And so you don't have any tie-ins to get into the college football playoff. So when does the NIL and the shine of FBS wear off? Because these kids don't want to just go out there and play for 9-3, 10-2. Hey, great season, guys, but we didn't win a conference because we're the only independent program outside of Notre Dame.
Yeah, and you make great points, because all of that, it's huge. The money part of this is if you don't have anything you're tied into, then, because I have Bison fans already emailing me this morning. Well, you said NDSU should never. I still agree with that. Independent is. Yeah, I think it's beyond last option. I would stay FCS. If it's between FCS or independent and FBS, I would stay FCS 10 out of 10 and twice on Sunday.
1,000%. And Just me, I think North Dakota State has played this the smartest, right? When you look, let's look at it from a totality standpoint. They're not going to make a rash move to FBS and spend all this money to go independent and compete for nothing.
Right.
They're also not going to just rush into a conference, right? And increase their travel costs. They're not going to join the MAC, which North Dakota State has, at this point, if they would have joined it in 2012, probably wins the MAC every single year up until this year, is how bad that conference has been. And then also, too, even with the House settlement, right? North Dakota State's going to take their time. Let's see how this works out because we're still going to be one of the best teams in the subdivision. I think for Sac State, it would have been way more beneficial for them to stay for the in the FCS this next season, right? If Brennan Marion is bringing in all these transfers and all this talent, if you're really that good, let's go see if you can compete for an FCS national championship.
Right.
That would get your fans more excited, in my opinion, than just going into 2025 and now you got to play South Dakota State. And man, it doesn't mean anything now
Yeah.
because you're not playing for anything because you're not eligible for anything. And so I'm with you. For me, FCS is light years ahead of being independent in no man's land in FBS.
Well, and the point too, Sac State's that they got to go find 12 games a year because you're not tied into a league. You got
Yep.
wait, who are you going to go play? Teams are always looking for games, but now you got to go cross country. That's not a. I know it's once a week. That's not a cheap endeavor either to go find 12. And what is the Big Sky? Do they keep them? I don't know if they're not a full member. Do they say, hey, we don't want you, get out? Maybe.
They could, and now you got to find a home for all your Olympic
Right.
sports, right? And that's and we're talking about April, so you only got a few months to kind of get this together.
Right.
And it really just seems like they got impatient. And like you said, in the intro, come hell or high water, we're going FBS. I don't care what it looks like. I don't care if we're ready. We're just going to force our way into the door. And then once we get in there, right? Once we get in this room, all right, is there another door unlocked that we could potentially knock down to get to the next step of this process? And I'm with you. And also too, if you can't get home and home series,
Yeah.
right? Now you're forking out money for people to come play you at home, and that impacts your bottom line for home games where their attendance is okay, right? They bring 14, 15, 16,000 to a game, but are the fans going to be as excited for games that don't have much meaning? And like you said, who are you playing? And what makes you think other FBS teams are lining up? I still think they end up playing like 2, 3 Big Sky schools potentially
Maybe.
as an FBS FCS game. And now you have to pay what? Montana State $500K to come play you at home?
And maybe lose because I think Montana State's pretty good that they'll probably not win that game. I mean, we've seen it before with other leagues, and I know the Big Sky fairly well that they would say, you know what, if you don't want to be here, you're not going to be here in all the other sports. And then you're really, really in trouble then.
Well, then you also have the other, I guess, caveat to this, right? Because if people forget, UC Davis is moving all their sports but football to the Mountain West. And I guess the hush-hush deal on that was the Mountain West promised that they'd be the next school to get brought in if they decided to expand. Does Sac State going to FBS now bypass that a little bit? Or how would Sac State feel if UC Davis got the Mountain West invite before them after forcing their way into the FBS? It would just be, especially with all the rivalry there's
a rivalry there.
They would get caught with all the egg on their face on that decision.
Yeah, that's just, I look at, because this time last year, Zach, we're having the same, and I know people were really bemoaning the news on Missouri State. This one, I feel Sac State has had a couple good years. They haven't had playoff success. They made it to the quarterfinals a couple years ago and lost to Incarnate Word in the craziest game ever. But I feel worse about this one because they don't have a home. At least most State had CUSA lined up. They were going there. This one just feels, we're throwing something in the wind. We'll hope it works.
Yeah, this is going to be, I think, the test, right? Where I think there are some FCS programs that are getting desperate to move up. If Sac State makes it work, right, then maybe we could see someone else try.
More power to you. Yeah, right.
Yeah, they look like geniuses, right? But to me, if you're putting likelihoods on it, the likelihood that this turns out in a negative way is a much more likely outcome than this working out perfectly like they planned. And also, too, when your AD's out in front of the public, right, promising and guaranteeing and saying, we're going to do this, give us your money, we're going to make this move, it puts a lot of pressure on them when that invite never came. And I think that kind of forced his hand because you don't hear North Dakota State's AD out here, we're going FBS.
Mm.
Give us your money. We're going to make this move, no doubt, no question. And I really do think maybe Sac State's AD and some of the administration put the cart in front of the horse in this situation, and it forced their hand to make a desperate move like this.
Give me your sense here as we're going through spring ball around the country for different teams. Is there a team we're not talking about enough that 2025 they could make a splash in FCS football, in your opinion?
Ooh, I think there's two or three. I think the biggest one is, and listen, this team's been around, right? This isn't just a no-name school. Incarnate Word is going to be really good
Okay.
next year. I think now, if you remember that 2022 team that came up to Fargo and had that big run with Lindsey Scott, this year's team on paper is more talented than that team. In terms of now, do they have a Lindsey Scott, right? Because that's the big question. Do you have a guy who could throw for 6,000 yards in a year and all this? Maybe not, but they go and get Richie Munoz from Weber State, who is a solid quarterback in the Big Sky, threw for like 500 yards against Montana this past year. But then you look at their wide receiving core. They bring back Jalen Walthall, All-American wide receiver, Roy Alexander, All-American receiver coming back. They go and add Cheaton James from Fresno State, who was an All-American at Idaho State 2 years ago. They bring back multiple starters on the O line. On top of that, too, defensively, they got back Dune Smith, who was a transfer from Southern Illinois a few years ago.
Yeah.
They bring back all these key pieces. Now, the question is, when you go up against the North Dakota States, the Montana States, is your interior defensive line big enough and strong enough, and you have the depth to just I would say match up in the trenches, because that's where these games are won, and that's where some of these teams from the South have not matched
No.
up very well. I would also say this, a team that I think is due for a breakout, Monmouth. They were a team
Okay.
that made a playoff run in the Big South before the merger, and they went to the CAA. They returned Derek Robertson, who's probably the best returning quarterback in the FCS. Was an All-American last year. They've returned almost their entire wide receiving core, including a freshman All-American wide receiver in Trey Neal. Their running back was a freshman All-American last year. And the question for them is, defensively, they had all these young guys who contributed. Do they gel and take that step forward? Because that's been the thing with Monmouth. They can score 50 points a game, but
Right.
man, they're going to give up 47 points a game on the defensive side. I don't know if they're a national title contender, right? But they're a team who I could see coming out of the CAA, which every year there seems to be a dark horse team, and then a Valley team. I think Illinois State's going to be really good
Yep,
again.
I agree with you there.
They
Yep.
they had a big year last year, and they were hurt a lot of the year, right? And so a lot of those guys got extra eligibility. They brought back a lot of key pieces. I think if there's a year Illinois State can get back into the potential semifinal run mode, this would be the year to do it. And they have a head coach who has done it and been to championships and knows what it takes to make deep playoff runs. And I think they could capitalize on that this year. Where you look, it's North Dakota State, but then Montana State has questions, South Dakota State has questions. There's kind of a spot open in that,
Yeah.
1B tier in the FCS.
Before I let you go, a multiple choice here. Who wins more games in FBS this year? Sam Houston, Jacksonville State, Kennesaw, Delaware, or Mo State? Who wins the most out of that group of the recent move-ups?
Oh, I haven't looked at the schedules, but just off the top of my head, I think Jacksonville State.
Okay.
I think when you look at the trajectory of that program, that they have been really good. Now, Rich Rod not being there, maybe they take a small step back, but I just think Jacksonville State has been building. They have shocked me. I'll be honest. When all these teams moved up,
Yeah.
Jacksonville State, Sam Houston, I was like, ooh, I'm a little worried, because I grew up a Jacksonville State fan, being from Alabama. It's like, are we really ready for this? They've exceeded all expectations. I do think Sam Houston's a close second, though, man. They had a really
were good.
big year last
Yep.
year, and they were really young. But then also with Casey Keeler leaving, do they continue it? So I think it's one of those two teams. The other ones, I think it's going to take a year. Delaware, by far, is ready to compete more than Mo State. I think Mo State is going to go through some growing pains.
Jack State opens at UCF, and they host, and then Liberty at Georgia Southern. They do get Murray State, so I know they're going to get a win there to open
That's a win.
their first 4 games. This was great, bud. I really appreciate you doing this on short notice. We'll have you on again as we get closer to football season, okay?
Absolutely. Thank you, Mo.
Zach McKinnel joining us, FCS Football Central from the Blue Bloods, does an awesome job covering FCS football nationally there. And again, for those that missed the story late last night from Pete Thamel, Sac State is planning to file an application with the NCAA this week to transition from the FCS to the FBS in football as an independent. Sources telling ESPN the school's already filed a waiver to transition as an independent in football, which requires NCAA approval. By transitioning as an independent, Sacramento State is positioning itself to join an FBS conference in the future. The Hornets need a waiver because they're not transitioning with a conference invite. They hired Brennan Marion as head coach in December. He was a former UNLV offensive coordinator. They're planning to play football in the Big Sky for 2025. They were 3-9 this past season. That's after, you'll remember, 2023, they came to Grand Forks, won a playoff game, lost in Vermilion in the second round. The year before that, they made it all the way to the quarterfinals. You saw it, that crazy game with Incarnate Word and Lindsey Scott. Eric, what was that game? Was it 66-63? It was something ridiculous like that the Bison ended up hosting, because if not, NDSU would have gone to Sac State and played in the semifinals that year in 2022. Thamel ends it by, if everything is approved, the Hornets would be ineligible for the football postseason for 2025 and 2026. Then they would be football postseason eligible in 2027. I really think it's interesting what the Big Sky does here, because if anything, college athletics are petty. They could say, if you're not going to be here, get out. They could do that, cut your nose to spite your face. Because then what are you doing with your other? Because right now they have 10. They have 10 members in the Big Sky, full time, not counting Davis, who's leaving obviously, or Cal Poly. Those are full time members that you guarantee. We've got round robin games and basketball. We don't mess with that. Because if you do that, then you're in the same boat the Summit League is. You got 9 schools. And I know there are other schools, specifically the WAC, that are looking for lifelines. They're not going to throw one to Southern Utah's way. I'm going to tell you that right now, after what happened between Southern Utah and the Big Sky. But it would not surprise me if this comes to fruition, that the Big Sky goes, okay, well, good luck. We don't need you. If you don't want to be here, get out. We'll see. Other leagues have done it before. So it'd be interesting to see what happens. But Sac State is going FBS. Got a couple emails on that, which we'll get to when we come back after this. We'll take a break. Hot Mic continues on this Thursday morning. Looks like the snow finally got out of here for a little bit. Back after this.